Alright, hopefully this is working now. I made the mistake of recording without double checking my OBS settings, and it was not actually recording any of my audio, so this is an after post-production voiceover. So I already know how it's going to go. We are starting a new game. I said I was going to do a Let's Play during my borehole drill videos. Been a little bit since then, but I've been rewatching Game of Thrones in preparation for Season 8 tonight. Now that that's done, I am going to get this started. We're going to use the star system custom game. I find that to be the most interesting one because it doesn't give you a whole bunch of free stuff to start with, just a drop pod, kind of the bare minimum to get you started. I use most of I think our default inventory settings. Realistic character inventory is a little bit too small, whereas you make anything else too big, it kind of defeats the purpose of needing to build cargo ships and rovers and stuff like that. I am using realistic sound mode rather than arcade sound mode, mostly because the inventory full voiceover annoys me. We are using some meteors, kind of normal, not anything crazy, just so that we have a little bit of a thing to defend against. Turning on wolves and spiders, again, just for something to defend against, and kind of a need to worry about that early game. You don't really get a whole lot of interaction from drones early game when you're on planet. That all waits until you're really out in space exploring. Other than that, I think everything's pretty much default. Turning on a lot of the other settings that I don't really know what they do, but they seem like they make things a little bit more realistic in terms of being able to damage yourself using your own subgrids and stuff like that. So we are going to go ahead and turn that stuff on. My machine is not the best, so it's going to take a little bit here in the loading screen. I'm going to try to avoid save spamming specifically so I don't have to show a bunch of loading screens. I suppose at this point, since I am already editing a voiceover, I could edit out the loading screens, but it didn't end up taking that long, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it in and not worry about that. We are going to start on the Earth-like planet so that we have oxygen. We don't have to worry about that, although it turns out it would have been very easy, spoiler alert, because we end up landing in a big ice field. So that wouldn't have been difficult, but you know, if we'd have gone anywhere else, we probably wouldn't have landed in a gigantic ice field. But that's not something we're going to have to worry about. We are going to have to worry about gravity. Gravity is, I think, the strongest, if not, it's close to the strongest using the Earth-like planet. The other starts are a little bit easier in terms of gravity. I think 0.9 is the next highest one after the Earth-like planet. I could be remembering that wrong. So we start ourselves off in that drop pod, and that drop pod does have a parachute. It's parachuting down. It does have full power to start with, and some atmospheric thrusters and some ice and a hydrogen thruster, so we could have a powered landing, but there's really no reason to, especially because our landing area is not that bad. You can see here it is tundra. I'm going to go ahead and grab the assault rifle and ammunition out of the passenger seat while I'm sitting in it. We'll end up using that passenger seat for some much needed cargo space in fairly short order here. And it is good to be armed just in case a wolf shows up. A little bit of a hard landing, but not such that it damages anything. We landed on very flat ground. You can see most of the landing gear there, or at least I think it's 3 of the landing gear there did actually lock. And I think the only reason the other one didn't lock is because the other 3 locked first. We found magnesium right on our landing spot. That's definitely a good thing. As I said, we do have wolves enabled, and there's no spiders on the Earth-like planet that I've seen yet anyway. I could be wrong about that, but we do have wolves enabled, so it's good that we landed near some magnesium so we can replenish our ammunition supply. That is one of the resources you cannot get from processing stone in the survival kit. We can get iron, nickel, and silicon from the survival kit, so we don't really have to worry too much about those, but magnesium is not available, so the fact that we landed right next to a deposit is definitely helpful. I'm going to go ahead and reorganize our hotbar there, get all the other stuff off there, and get the rifle inserted there at the beginning and shift everything else down accordingly, so that we have quick access to that. And the next thing we're going to do is have a quick look around here just to see if we can spot any other ore deposits. There does not end up being any. You can see our power there is over 75% full. It is actually almost completely full when you start off, but since it's not 100% anymore and it is draining power, it's not going to have those 4 lights lit up by the time you land. and then we're going to start drilling because we need lots and lots of stone to get ourselves started. We're going to drill in the direction of that magnesium generally, but we want to keep our hole close to the respawn pod because that respawn pod is life, and everything kind of happens around there to start with. So we want the hole close to there when we come in and out. We want to be right next to that. We are going to have to drill through some ice before we get to the stone, but that's okay. Ice is a good thing to have. We are going to end up with a little bit too much of it. We're going to have to find some place to put it. But again, having too much ice is one of those good problems. Finding somewhere to store it, we do end up having enough room to store all the ice that we end up digging up, although I do switch into right-click drill mode here eventually just because we end up with so much of it. We'll get some to start off, excuse me. Go ahead and get it loaded into the O2H2 generator just so it's there when we're ready for it. Our inventory there is already full. And that's why we switch into right-click drilling mode here until we get down into the stone. Nice thing about starting off in tundra is you don't have to dig through a whole bunch of dirt where you're not really collecting a whole lot of stone efficiently. By the time you get through the ice, you're getting the rock. You'll see there that our O2 level is low, which is enough that we don't need our helmet. I did open the helmet visor earlier there. I mentioned it initially when I was doing the recording, but forgot to mention it here doing the voiceover. Although for some reason we're actually in warm climate, which is nice. That means that we do not have to use a whole bunch of suit energy to keep ourselves comfortable. Again, no room for more ice, but we can go ahead and get our stone started here since we finally got into the stone. And we're going to build lots of ingots. At least we're going to queue them up just so that that's constantly running. The ingots do require 500 stone apiece. If you don't have an even 500, it will just leave the leftovers there. And then that'll just kind of sit there in the queue. If you try to build anything else on top of it, that will go ahead and take priority over the ingots that can't be built. Now, more stone. Make sure that we have enough room to walk because crouching is much slower. We're going to be going in and out of this hole quite a bit to get started here. And because of all this extra ice, we're going to try to find somewhere to stick it. We're going to go ahead and pull that tank out of there so we can get a look around. We're looking for ore splotches. The ground does have a slight discoloration when there's ore present. I initially thought it might be some of these darker shadowed areas because usually when I see this being done, it's in a grassland area where, you know, any discoloration is fairly obviously ore. It's a little bit harder to see on the tundra, but eventually I will realize here that, you know, through looking at that magnesium deposit that we're right next to, it is actually kind of a tan discoloration that indicates the ore deposits. You can see it there where the magnesium is. It's more tannish than it is black or gray or whatever. So that's an indicator that we've got ore underneath the surface, even if we can't necessarily see it with the ore detector because we're too far away. The ore detector on the drill is very substandard. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you're even slightly off the ground. The small grid ore detector on the drop pod's a little bit better, but not a whole lot. And even the large grid detector that you can get is not super. It gives you 150 meters of range. So I mean, if you're flying fairly low to the ground, you can see stuff. Especially with the large grid detector, but you really do need to look for those discolorations to really know what's going on. Go ahead and refill our hydrogen tank there. And we do want to leave room to get that hydrogen tank in and out of there, so we don't want to put all the ice in there and fill it up. Because if we can't get the hydrogen tank in to refill it, then we're going to have that inventory room to pull ice out to get it in there anyway, to actually use it and get it refilled. So you can see a lot of our inventory space at this point is being taken up by ice. That is not helpful. So we're going to kind of unload some of that. We got a little bit of room in our small cargo container in the middle of the ship there that we can't really see right now, but we got a little bit more room in the passenger seat, so we're going to go ahead and dump most of that in the passenger seat for now. And we got enough room to fit it all in there, so that's good. Now we've got a little bit more inventory space. We can carry more stone in and out of the hole as we go. Because that is kind of grindy at this point, and that is one reason to have a bigger inventory size, because this part here in particular. But it doesn't last very long before you're ready to start using ships and stuff to do all this kind of heavy lifting, grinding work for you. So That is why I kept the inventory size the way I did, just at ×3. Realistic would be much worse though in dealing with this, so that's why I didn't go that far with it. Did pick up a little bit of ice down there. There's still some there on the bottom that we haven't picked up yet, so we're going to be getting a little bit of ice here and there as we go in and out. The conveyors are not connected to the passenger seat, so you actually have to sit in the passenger seat to access this inventory. But at the start here, like I said, it's a lot of stone. You don't have a refinery to actually refine ore, so even if you do land near ore, you're not going to be able to do anything with it until you build a basic refinery at least. And even the basic refinery can't refine everything. It can refine everything you can get from stone. It can also refine stone just like the survival kit can. It can do it even more effectively because it doesn't require 500 kilograms to get a batch running. It will use everything, at least up to less than 0.01 kilograms is what you'll usually see left in the refinery of stone. Takes more power, but is a little bit more efficient in that regard. So ore is not going to be helpful to us at this point. If we do actually get to the magnesium before we get to that point, we'll just kind of dig around it. So we don't have to use a whole bunch of storage space to store magnesium ore we can't do anything with. But we will get a basic refinery going here before too long. But our goal for this episode is the basic assembler and some exploration to see if we can find some of the other ores we're going to eventually need. As I said, you can see we're getting iron, nickel, and silicon out of the stone refining from the survival kit, and that's the same materials we will get from the basic refinery if we use stone to process in there. We're going to also want cobalt semi-urgently. We're going to want the magnesium we're heading towards. The magnesium is used for ammunition. The cobalt is used for metal grids, and those metal grids are necessary for large grid cargo containers and for engines, whether they're atmospheric thrusters or hydrogen thrusters. They both require metal grids. Ion thrusters require thruster parts, or thruster components, which is platinum. That's not found on the planet. You're going to have to go into space for that, but that's not urgent. We're mostly worried about atmospheric thrusters and soon after that hydrogen thrusters at this point, so we will need cobalt. And we will actually need to find the ore for that because we can't get that from stone. Gold and silver we can find on the planet. Need to do some exploring to find those, but those are not urgent either. We do have enough medical components, which are made from the silver in the survival kit, that we can move that survival kit over to the base that we eventually start building if we choose to, or just keep it on the drop pod. However we choose to do that is fine, but we do have enough medical components in that survival kit already to get us started until we actually do find some silver and have a full refinery that's able to process it and eventually build those medical components. Gold is even less useful in the early game. You need that for superconductors and gravity components, I think, and maybe some other stuff. But none of that we really need to worry about at this point. So that is also less urgent. And finally, uranium for reactors. But we're going to be getting our power from renewable sources for the time being. Or we're going to use some ice to power a hydrogen generator. At least in this early phase here, so we don't have to worry about that either. And that is also not available on the planet. You got to go into space to get the uranium. Our first step here is we're going to be building some wind turbines. The higher you build your wind turbines, the more useful they are. We are going to try to go about 8 blocks up. That will typically get you to the optimal spot for building a wind turbine. And we don't actually need to fill out those armor blocks at this point. We're just trying to get the structure in place here. Wolves won't do enough damage to those to really be a problem, and they won't be able to reach the wind turbine. But we do actually need to finish out that wind turbine because that does need to be functional, otherwise it's not going to produce any power. And we stuck in too many interior plates there because we don't need those interior plates up at the top. Those are just kind of finishing off to make it a little bit stronger. So we want to try to preserve resources or conserve resources at this point. So we're just going to use those initial 10 rather than doing the additional 10 or 30 that are needed at the top. So we did destroy that so we could put it back in just with those 10 interior plates. And now we're going to need to construct some other stuff. We need 20 construction components, 24 girders, 2 computers, and 8 motors to get that finished. So we'll get all that queued up. And then we're going to work a little bit more on our platform here, just so that we're kind of building out the structure of what we're going to need. Like I said, our target for this episode is a basic assembler, and we do want to have enough room to arrange that appropriately, and we don't want to have to jump up and down or use the jetpack to get up and down here. So that's why the ramps are there. And you want to face the assembler like that so that you are able to connect the refinery to the conveyor port, and you can access the assembler through the refinery. And until that refinery is finished, you will be able to reach through it and access the assembler directly. And we had the steel plates to go ahead and do that. We didn't need any steel plates to do the wind turbine, so we used the extra ones that we had to get started on that. And it turns out we did actually pick up enough resources in that initial drilling run to get the wind turbine finished. So we're just waiting on that to wrap up now. And there we go. Fly up and get that welded up and get our power going. Although there's nothing to do with it at this point because the assembler's not done. And there we go. We have power. Next thing to do is work on that basic assembler. Need quite a few bits for that. Go ahead and put in the steel plates we still have. We still need about 56 of them, I think was the number, plus a bunch of other stuff. So go ahead and get that queued up. Now for this, we do not have enough resources already in the survival kit, so we're going to need to dig up some more stone to get everything queued. But we'll go ahead and get everything queued just so we can get a more accurate picture of what's going on. We don't have to sit here and try to remember all the stuff that we need. We did almost remember all of it, just forgot about the motors. But I knew I forgot about the motors, so there's that. Control click to queue up 10 or move 10. Shift click is 100, control shift click is 1000. That counts for queuing things up in the assembler and for shifting things between inventories. You can also double click to move everything from an inventory, but that doesn't apply to production, obviously. More digging. We still got 40 meters, 41 meters to go to get to that magnesium, so we're going to get a lot of stone before we hit that. It isn't an urgent need. We do have 90 rounds right now for our assault rifle. And as long as we are judicious with our ammunition, that should not be a problem. We haven't seen any wolves yet. Worst case scenario, we can also use the grinder as a melee weapon. But that means that they're also close enough to use their teeth as a melee weapon against you, so that's not ideal. Ideally, you will have the ammunition to shoot them. We do need to be careful if we're shooting them around our base, though, because those light armor blocks, without being completed, are very fragile. One round will take them out, and if we shoot down our wind turbine tower, then the wind turbine will disconnect and fall on the ground and possibly break, and that will be bad. So it is one reason to weld up your armor blocks there, just so that if any stray rounds do hit it, it's got some tolerance for damage. But we're not going to worry about that for the time being, because we are tight on resources right now. All of our iron is going into our assembler production. We're going to go ahead and drill out the top here a little bit just so we do have room to walk in and out of here, because walking is much faster than crouching. So we want to be able to make sure we can walk without bumping our heads. That is all the steel plates that we need, so I'll go ahead and pop those in. Use right click to pop things in without welding at all. It's really a little bit of OCD on my part. There's really no reason why you couldn't start welding it too, just to save yourself some time later, but I like to stick all the components in and then weld the whole thing all at once. Your preferences may vary. Almost done with the construction components there. But since the ingots are queued ahead of that, it's going to process all the stone first. There we go. Motors, displays, and computers. Now the computers are relatively easy because they don't require a whole lot of resources, and most of what they require is actually silicon. So we are going to re-queue those in just a minute here. The motors are probably the most resource intensive of what's left, especially because there's a little bit more of them than there is displays. Displays are also mostly silicon, but a little bit of the other stuff too. Motors are nickel and iron, and a fair amount of both. And they definitely take a long time to actually build. So I think it's now, it might be in another trip, but I think it's now that we are going to reorder that just so that we can get those done first. And then we can finish up the computers relatively easily once all that's done, because we have a lot of silicon there relative to everything else. Yep, there we go. We're going to go ahead and re-queue that. We're going to finish the displays because there are not that many of them. Just real quick to finish those. And then we'll get the motors. And then last of all, we will get the computers. So there's our displays put in. We're working on the motors, and we do have enough iron now, and that really is our bottleneck because we're using iron for a lot of other stuff. The nickel's only used for any electrical components, so obviously the motors are included in that. But the construction components and the steel plates only take iron, so and a fair amount of it at that, especially for the steel plates. So iron really is the bottleneck at this point, and the fact that we have so much iron is why we were able to finish those motors. Now the computers do take a little bit of iron, but not much. It's mostly silicon, and we have tons of silicon, relatively speaking. So we are going to be able to finish up the computers without going back down into the hole. Go. Now we can finish our assembler. Stick in the last few components. We don't need those steel plates at the top. That's just for protecting it and keeping it functional if it takes any damage. But we are in resource preservation mode right now, and we're not facing any immediate threats, so we're going to go ahead and just go to functional and stop there. That is the assembler done. We can reach through the shell of the refinery. That wind turbine's named number 2 because we did destroy the first one with the extra interior plates in it, so we'll go ahead and rename that. And that's generating 353 kilowatts, currently outputting 1 kilowatt because that is the flea power necessary to run the basic assembler. You actually want to build anything, it takes 280. We do have that. We have 353, so we have enough to run the assembler. We are not going to have enough to run the assembler and the refinery both. You see that takes 330 kilowatts. But the assembler will allow us to build batteries, and we can charge up the batteries when we're not using either, and the battery can run both at the same time, or we can just shift between using one and using the other. That will not be a problem. You can see those are the power cells that we need for the batteries. We were not able to build those in the survival kit. We've also got the detector components, steel tubes, radio components, medical components, ammunition, metal grids, a bunch of other stuff that's available in the basic assembler that is not available in the survival kit, and there's further items that are available in the regular assembler, not the basic one, that are not available in the basic one. So we will eventually move up to that, but there is no hurry at this point. The main thing that we need out of here is the power cells and eventually the metal grids and the tubes so that we can get a battery up and running first of all, and then work on either retrofitting the drop pod or building a new ship or a rover to get us moving around. The rover we don't need the metal grids for, but we will need a battery at least. And the battery we can build with parts we can refine from stone, or with resources we can refine from stone with the iron, nickel, and silicon, but the metal grids are required for the engines that we will need to add some maneuverability to that ship or build a new one. The drop pod, even just for atmospheric flight. We're going to go ahead and clean out the stone out of the hull, just because it's more useful. It's refined resources in the survival kit than it is stone in the hull, and there's always a risk of it despawning. Take a quick look through at some of the parts here in the drop pod. We've got our battery here. We've got plenty of power in it for now. It won't last forever, but it's going to last us a while still. There's our O2H2 generator. When it's not doing anything, I don't think it actually does take all that power up, but that's how much power it could possibly take. Survival kit takes 200 kilowatts to run, which is less than the basic assembler and less than the refinery, but as I said, it's not as efficient. It doesn't actually process ores and doesn't build as many things. Beacons turned off and stay off because we do actually have a GPS marker that follows the drop pod around. It's not showing all of our landing gear. There's a lot of hidden blocks here. There's thrusters, there's lights, there's a hydrogen thruster, more lights, more landing gear, passenger seat, and a timer that doesn't actually do anything. Now, if we want to use this drop pod, we are going to have to put a cockpit on it. We're going to have to put a gyroscope on it. And realistically, we're going to have to put more thrusters on it because those 4 thrusters are not really enough to control us. We will wobble a lot. Now, we could strip down the hydrogen thruster and build some new atmospheric thrusters for directional control that way. The downside of that being that there's not really enough thrust in just one atmospheric thruster to really use for cargo or mining. So it is going to be pretty important that we fairly shortly get hold of some cobalt for some more metal grids, and in that spirit we are going to go ahead and grab that hydrogen tank again and take a look around, see if we can find some tan spots similar to the one that's underneath the magnesium there, see if we can find some other resources. Spoiler alert, we do. But not over here. Over here we just have lots and lots of ice. Ice is obvious. Obviously there is ice. There is ice pretty much as far as the eye can see right now. That direction over there also looks promising. And the first ore that we will encounter in this discolored patch here is nickel. Nickel is good. We can get it from stone, so it's not great, but it's much more efficient to get the ore and refine the ore than it is to try to pull it out of stone, so that's a good thing. But we've got some iron too. We need lots of iron, so pulling it out of stone is relatively inefficient, as I said, compared to using the ore, so finding iron ore is definitely a good thing. We could still see the nickel from this spot, so we'll go ahead and remove that GPS marker and mark them both. But wait, there's more. Cobalt. That's the important one. That's the one we really need. It is not a problem to do some exploring to find gold and silver. Those are not urgent needs. Once we have the atmospheric thrusters and can properly control a mining ship, finding that stuff is relatively easy. Finding cobalt, that's hard. If you want to find cobalt, you need to either do it on foot or you need to do it in a rover, because realistically you're not going to be able to maneuver a atmospheric ship very well to find it and mine it and return it. But fortunately enough, we did find a deposit that is close enough to our respawn pod that we can drive a rover out here. The terrain is pretty forgiving. A rover will be able to handle it. So we got very lucky finding that cobalt. That is definitely a good thing. And it is 1.25 kilometers away from the respawn pod. You can see the terrain that we're flying over here to get back to the respawn pod is gentle and rolling rather than jagged and mountainous like we have just past the respawn pod there in the background. So we definitely got lucky with this start, especially because we also have the magnesium right next to our respawn pod that we can use to build additional ammunition or produce more ammunition. So definitely a good start. And we are going to wrap up very shortly here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to refill our hydrogen tank and fill up the ice out of the passenger seat, because we do want to get all that ice out of the passenger seat. That's not the best place for it. And we are eventually going to tear out that passenger seat because we want to put a cockpit in this if we're going to use it, or we're going to tear the whole thing apart, and we definitely don't want anything in there at that point. So the sooner we can get the ice out of there or into somewhere else, the better. Doesn't take a whole lot of ice to fill it up, though, from where we were. But that marker is going to be our lifeblood. So our priority in the next episode is going to be getting a basic refinery and getting some mining set up on that cobalt deposit, and getting a rover maybe even to transport ore back and forth from that spot. And we will need the refinery to actually process that ore and build anything out of it, so the refinery is probably going to be number one. And it will also make the stone processing faster and more efficient, so that is going to be priority number one, I think. And then the rover can be built after that more easily, since we will have a basic assembler and a refinery to do the heavy lifting for us. Might even go ahead and build a drilling rig onto the base so we can get that stone more quickly and easily than drilling for it manually. And the direction we're going with that, it is in the direction of the magnesium, so we may actually be able to get into the magnesium deposit from a drilling rig on the base as well. But that is all to be determined next time. Subscribe if you want to see what happens. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Bye-bye. I'm still talking to myself here, but, you know, voiceover. I will make sure my microphone is working properly before I start recording next time.